Brown once said, "Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change." While it is possible to apply this quote to many movements in film, there is nothing it reflects better than the Czech New Wave movement, which is the topic of this comparative study. Today, I will be exploring how the Czech New Wave movement in cinema influenced modern filmmaking, taking a particular look at Vera Chytilova's 1966 Daisies and Sofia Coppola's debut picture made after Jeffrey Eugene's novel of the same title, Virgin Suicides, released in 1999. There are many examples in the history of film when censorship rules, though often unjust, actually led to more creativity and the new forms of expression. This is most certainly the case for the Czech New Wave movement in film, which originated in 1960s Czechoslovakia as a response to the Soviet oppression of the post-World War II Czech Republic. As a response to the aforementioned censorship, the movement is often characterized as a satire or a critique of the socialist government and communism, an openness to discuss and depict sexuality and the reversal of traditional gender roles, the cast of non-professional actors, the use of documentary techniques to portray fictional stories, and finally the gender abandonment of the Hollywood-imposed traditional cinematic rules. This video essay examines which of these and other elements of the Czech New Wave were shown in Daisies, and which of them were adopted by the modern director Sofia Coppola. Despite the obvious differences between the two films, one being that they are set apart by over 35 years and made in two different countries and cultural contexts of Czechoslovakia under the Soviet depression and suburban America, there are perhaps hidden similarities, common ideas, and themes explored in this study justify the inclusion of these two films in this video essay. Even the synopsis of the films are similar, as both stories are built around young girls trying to navigate through life. In Chytilova's Daisies, it is the two Maries who decide to go bad after they see that the world has gone bad, and feeling as though there are no consequences to their actions, start to engage in various rebellious and provocative behavior, including hedonism and irreverence towards authority, particularly the rich old man. In Coppola's Virgin Suicides, the Lisbon sisters commit suicide after facing the difficulty of life as teen girls, being raised by an overly conservative religious family in suburban America. Ultimately, both films present girls facing external and internal conflicts and illustrate different ways they attempt to cope or resolve them. One of the major key elements of the Czech New Wave films, notably Daisies, is the overarching theme of rebellion. Looking at it through the lens of historical and political context, Daisies appears to indirectly criticize the socialist government and protest against the Soviet censorship by often walking a strict line and challenging the rules they imposed. An example of this presents itself when Marie too appears nude, only with her sexual organs covered by the butterfly taxidermy paintings, thus challenging the Soviet-imposed rule of nudity and censorship in film. Regarding the rebellion against the socialist government, the ending scenes where the protagonists engage in a long food fight comment on the prolonged hunger in Czechoslovakia, which was majorly blamed on the government. Moreover, in the end, the two Maries decide to fix the results of their destructive behavior and become good and hardworking and therefore happy. However, the scene almost looks absurd because the banquet room is destroyed far beyond what is fixable, and though Maries say that they are happy, it is evident by their facial expressions that they don't feel a shred of happiness or joy. Chytilova ends her film with a written-on-screen rhetorical question: is there any way to mend what's been destroyed, which seems to be an intended criticism of government and the damage caused by communism. Since the chandelier falls on Maries in both scenarios of their bad and good behavior, Chytilova suggests a rather pessimistic view that regardless of people's actions, the destruction from political forces and dictators is in fact inevitable. Similarly, we observe the theme of rebellion present in Virgin Suicides, which too presents a critique of the social cultural norms prevalent in middle-class suburban America in the 1970s. The Lisbon sisters, though seemingly obedient and innocent, challenge the ideology of conformity and repression of individuality in the cultural value of their settings. The Girl's Death addresses the theme of rebellion as the social system, values, and conventions failed the Lisbon sisters, leaving them no other choice than to take their own lives, which in some ways can in itself be seen as a form of rebellion. However, it is also interesting to examine how the two directors use the language of filmmaking to communicate the thematic rebellion. As mentioned earlier, in Daisies, Chytilova portrays rebellion not only metaphorically but also formally. Avant-garde and abstract, Daisies, unlike Virgin Suicides, doesn't follow the traditional narration in screenwriting, and has a non-linear plot with, as some say, entirely unrelated events and scenes. The film utilizes collages of static images, often uses transition from one scene to another. Through this, Chytilova goes against the traditional rules of cinematography, that is, using cameras to capture moving images at 24 frames per second, and challenges any assumptions of what filmmaking can and should be. Aligned with Czech New Wave conventions, Daisy stars in professional actors to make the film as realistic, or in fact non-realistic, and avant-garde as possible. In Virgin Suicides, on the other hand, while Coppola cast experienced actors, she too aimed for a naturalistic feel of the film, and unlike many mainstream American films, cast actual teenagers as lesbian girls. However, one of the ways that both films arguably raise the theme of rebellion the most is through the exploration of femininity. Following the two Maries, Daisies entirely flips the gender expectations of the time by reversing the narrative and providing the protagonist with authority and the right to trick older men for money and food. Chytilova revealed that the girls were not intended to be real people. Both Maries are physically attractive and display characteristics such as a high-pitched voice and a level of childishness that is used to be seen as a gender norm for women. However, Chytilova uses the same conventions to empower the Maries and highlight the absurdity of the patriarchal expectations by exaggerating those traits in her rebellious protagonists. Throughout the film, the cinematography is effectively used to create a two-dimensional image by often filming scenes in one shot from one eye-level, perfectly balanced angle, and no camera movement, giving the film an almost flat vision. This way, the director highlights that the Maries are simply concepts of the idealized women with reverse power to belittle men, and this way the movie depicts rebellion on another level of patriarchy. Hyperfeminism is similarly one of the biggest themes of Virgin Suicides that is too conveyed thematically, metaphorically, and visually in the story. Typical to her style and similar to Chytilova, Coppola creates the contrast between the innocent, fragile, and hyper-feminine looks of the girls and the struggle the societal norms and expectations put them through. When the youngest of the sisters, Cecilia, attempts suicide and is questioned by the male doctor,
"You're not even old enough to know how bad life gets."
She urges that,
"Obviously, doctor, you've never been a 13-year-old girl."
This way, while not entirely revealing all the reasons for the girls' suicides, Coppola challenges the mental health stigma and hints that there are elements of girlhood that are painful but often overlooked. Coppola utilizes color to symbolize the entrapment, or as the boys call it, the imprisonment of being a teenage girl by looking pretty on the outside. In Virgin Suicides, Coppola similarly comments on the flaws of patriarchal conventions and gender expectations of women by portraying the lesbian girls as feminine ideals who possess sensitivity, timidness, and perfect manners, perhaps with an exception for Lux, who is more rebellious out of the sisters. The struggle and subsequent death of the girls reveals the flaw of the concept of a perfect, innocent girl, and yet again challenges the system of suburban utopia and the societal and gender norms that limited and failed to support the girls in their self-discovery. This way, both Virgin Suicides and Daisies end their stories with the protagonist's deaths and present a critique not of the female characters themselves, but of the societal conventions and gender expectations of both Czechoslovakia and suburban America in the 70s. Moreover, the fact that all girls, including Lux, inevitably died demonstrates that their character and whether they were obedient or rebellious like Lux didn't matter, as they all put an end to their lives. This directly relates to the ending of Daisies, where Chytilova highlights that regardless of the actions of the Maries, whether they were destructive or hardworking and nice, they're symbols of female idealism, and because of the political social system, killed by the chandelier either way. This is a powerful message from both directors, commenting on the flaws of the patriarchal society and unrealistic expectations of women and young girls. The deaths of female protagonists of both films therefore signify the flawness of the social and political context, the unrealistic gender expectations of women, and religion flaws associated with femininity, as discussed in both Daisies and Virgin Suicides. It appears that both directors contribute to the female gaze in film and challenge the traditional concept of women and their roles in society. It's evident that both films are rooted in emotionally heavy events of political corruption and oppression in Daisies and the act of suicide in Virgin Suicides, both portraying different elements of rebellion, thus revealing many flaws around societal conventions. This way, one can conclude how the imposed censorship restrictions led to the spike of creativity, forming the Czech New Wave movement, which overarching theme of rebellion that comes in many metaphorical and formal ways still influences and inspires the filmmakers of today.